Hello there. So in this lecture, I intended to add a psychology tip at the beginning of my lecture because most of the students go through a job interviewing process. So these psychology tips will help them a lot. So I got this one from the Psychology Today. So let's see what this tip says. People remember the first and last things you do. So make a good impression and end a high note. So basically it says that you are somehow judged by your looks. Okay, so dressing well, smelling good is very important if you want to get hired in a company. So this video is about allowing the Android Studio to infer the constraints for us. So imagine that there is a social situation here and a psychopath enters this situation. So this guy is a psychopath and he is here, and there are other guys here. For example, there is a person here and there is a girl here, okay, and she's here, someone else is here. So this psychopath, so let me just type in here the name so you understand what do I mean by psychopath. Okay, when this guy enters this situation, he sees all these other guys and this girl here. So what's going on here? So this guy assumes that because this guy dresses bad, this guy is a loser, okay? This guy infers that this person is a loser just because he dressed bad, okay? And another assumption is being made for this girl over here. This psychopath here thinks that if he starts talking to this girl, he gets rejected. Why? Because this psychopath thinks that the girl thinks that he has dressed very bad, okay? So this is how he thinks about this situation. So now let's go back to Android Studio and let's start learning about constraint layout and how the constraints are inferred. So just go to the activity underline main.xml. So here we've got this hello world text view. Let's just select it and then delete it. And then, so it seems that I just deleted the constraint. So let's just select the whole text view and then press on delete key on your keyboard. So let's drag a button from this palette section to our layout. So just drag the button here and you can see that on constraint layout, you can drop the view anywhere on the screen. So this is another great advantage of using a constraint layout. So for example, I want to put it here. Notice that I want the button to be at the bottom, and here, this is actually center horizontal. I just drop it here, right? So now, instead of adding the constraints myself, how about allowing the Android Studio to infer the constraints based on the position of this button on the layout, right? So just like that psychopath that I mentioned earlier, we can allow the Android Studio to be that psychopath and infer the constraints for this button. So how? Here you can see that we've got some items. Make sure that you selected the button. And here we've got some items for the constraint layout. One of these items is actually for inferring constraints. So if you hover over this item, it says infer constraints. So I just tap on this item here. Now the constraints are inferred. So let's just switch to the text tab and see what we have here. Okay, so we've got this button here. So we've got some attributes for the constraint. Constraint bottom to bottom of parent, end to end of parent, and start to start of parent. So in this way, the button is centered horizontally, as you can see here, and it is at the bottom of the screen, okay? So there are some attributes here. For example, you can see that the button width and the height is wrap content. We've got a margin bottom 16, and here, that's it. That's how the constraints are inferred using the Android Studio. So how can I continue? For example, I want to add a text view here and put it at the center of the layout. So I want this text view to be centered horizontally and vertically. So I just drop it here and then I go ahead and tap on this infer constraints item. So now the constraints are inferred for me. So if I just switch to the text tab, you can see these constraints here. So let's add another item. For example, I want to add a button here. Okay, so I just want it to be here and another button here, right? So here I can just go ahead and tap on these infer constraints. So the constraints are inferred for me, but sometimes the constraints that the Android Studio create for you are not the ones that you necessarily want. So in those cases, you just go ahead and adjust the constraints, okay? So for example, for this button here, I can just manually change the constraints, add or delete the constraints if I want. So you just need to adjust the constraints based on your application, based on your project. So this is how the process works. You just add a view, a layout to your view here, and then you add the constraints using this tool, infer constraints, and then you just go ahead and adjust the constraints. Then you add another item to the layout, then you infer the constraints and then adjust the constraints. Another item, infer, adjust. So this is how the process of inferring the constraints works, and it's gonna actually save you a lot of time and effort. So use this tool. It's a very cool tool that you can use in Android Studio.